So I'm here with Jeffrey Lax. Jeffrey and I don't really know each other, but we've been talking over the last a couple years. We're both professors at CUNY. We have very different perspectives, I think, on a bunch of issues related to free speech and anti-Semitism and American universities. But I'm really grateful he agreed to talk to me because I think it's really important to talk to people with whom one has disagreements to try to understand them better. And I'm really grateful to him for doing this. So Jeffrey, thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me. And I just want to say at the outset, I think there's one thing we both strongly agree on, and that is the importance of civility and having civil conversations. And nowadays in my classroom, I want my students to come out learning civility. If they walk out learning civility, I'm thrilled. And I hope that's one lesson that whatever side you're on, whatever position you take, that people can have civil conversations and disagreements.
Yes, I totally agree. So Jeffrey, just for those folks, particularly if they're some of my newsletter subscribers who are hearing this, they may not know very much about you. And I think sometimes, especially when it comes to issues having to do with anti-Semitism and Israel and Palestine, it can be useful to have a little bit of an understanding of someone's background. So is there anything you want to say about the personal, professional background that has kind of led you to be so active on these subjects?
Well, I think the most important thing to point out is that I come from Holocaust survivors. So for those who want to be a little bit more informed about where maybe some of my perspective comes from, it comes from that all four of my grandparents survived the Holocaust, which also means that my great grandparents did not survive the Holocaust. That about half of them were probably, we don't really know for sure, probably gassed in gas chambers. And so I have a small family, actually. It's starting to grow now because I had two sisters. So now I have a lot of beautiful nieces and nephews, and I love them. And I have two children of my own. But that's where this has nothing to do with how I got involved in the, I guess you can call it I don't like using the word activism for myself because I never thought of myself as an activist. It was not something I ever imagined that anyone would ever consider me. But I guess it is important to start out by saying that really what I wanted to be was an academic. I was a practicing attorney for about 5 years, didn't really like it. Kind of, a lot of litigators will tell you that they burn out after a couple of years, and I burned out after 5 years. And I always taught on the side at night. I used to leave my job early one night a week to teach at first I was teaching at Brooklyn College. I'm a total CUNY guy. I went to CUNY for undergrad. I went to CUNY for business school. I didn't go to CUNY Law School, but but I did a program with CUNY to get a JD MBA. And I continued. I've never been out of school since I was, I don't know, 3, because I've always either been in school or been teaching. And even when I was working full time, I was teaching at CUNY as an adjunct at night. And then I decided, why not actually enjoy my life instead of being a miserable litigator? And I flipped my career. So I became a full-time academic, and I've been doing that ever since.
Um, Thanks. I appreciate you saying that. I know there are a lot of American Jews, even younger American Jews, for whom the Shoah, the Holocaust, is ancient history. But if I'm correct, the number of Jews in the world is still lower than it was in 1939. Um,
That's a
um,
great point. We're not back up to the number of the population going into the Holocaust, and that is very scary. That's sad.
yeah. I mean, right. I mean, just think of the loss is unfathomable, with two-thirds of the destruction of two-thirds of European Jewry. So talk a little bit about the organization Safe Campus that you've been so involved in.
Yeah, so Safe Campus was formed, as I'm sure you remember, there was a big controversy by our faculty union in 2021 where they resolved I forgot the exact name of the resolution, but it was a resolution in support, I believe, of the Palestinian people was the name of it, which caused a lot of controversy. So again, regardless of which side you're on, there was a lot of argument and debate about it. And as you know, there were several groups that emerged from that debate. There were a lot of Jewish groups, not a lot, but several Jewish groups emerged. One of them was the group that ultimately became Safe Campus, but it started out with a different name. And I think you've said this several times in your past that you get three Jews in a room, you get three different opinions. So you had three different groups that wanted to go about the fight in three different ways, and
Right.
they
So like
merged in
that's
different
this is
ways.
the group I would never go to.
Yeah, yeah, and right, and it's like the Jackie Mason,
Right.
jokes, but which I'm not going to go into, but they're funny. But yeah, so a safe campus, I think, emerged, I think, the most prominently. So I'm proud of that. We do very hard work, and we try to protect. And I know a lot of your followers disagree with this, but we do try to protect Zionist Jews on campus, both students and faculty members, and protect their views, because I think that they've been discriminated against. I think there's evidence of that. In fact, I have an EEOC finding that substantiates that that's true. So that's what we try to do.
So tell me a little bit more. I mean, I would like to think of myself as believes that Jews who are Zionists should have the right to free speech, should have the right to be free from God forbid physical violence or intimidation or harassment, just like anybody else. Tell me more about why you think that's not been the case at CUNY.
And by the way, let me just clarify one thing, because I realize that people may be seeing me for the first. If you know me, then you know my view on this, but I realize your viewers may not understand this. We don't just seek to protect Zionist Jews. It's just that I feel that's a group that's been totally unaddressed. We seek to protect all Jews, no matter what your background is, even if you're anti-Zionist. And we seek, because me personally, I'm going to speak for myself today, not for my group, but I believe that even if you're an anti-Zionist Jew, even if you are just, let's say, I'm not sure exactly what this means, but you consider yourself racially Jewish, or you have connections to Judaism, whatever way it is, you need to be protected, right? And so I think I actually I'm not going to get into this because it will take a little while. Unless you're interested, we can get into it later. But I define Jews into five different legal groups. I'm a lawyer, so that's the way my brain works. And there are five different groups of Jews that are protected under the law. And some of those groups hate each other, because that includes anti-Zionist Jews in the group and Zionist Jews. And I think both need to be protected. So without going into detail about that, because I don't think that's really where you want to go, just to clarify what I said, we seek protection for all groups and not just Jews. I support, obviously, the Black community. I covered the George Floyd horrific case with Derek Chauvin. I was glad that Chauvin's appeal to Trump was not accepted. I covered that case for, I think, either Court TV or Law and Crime. I forgot which. So, we seek protection of all groups. I'm sorry. So you have to re-ask your question because I re-clarified
No,
it.
no,
So
I guess, yeah. I mean, I guess what are the kinds of discrimination or lack of safety, or that you see happening, and I guess I'm curious about yeah, why don't you just talk about what you see, and then maybe I'll ask a little specifically about this Hunter College posting.
yeah, well, I'll start with the one that was most close to home for me,
Mhm,
which was that on my campus, there was a student who took a baseball bat
mhm,
and beat the living hell out of a Jew wearing a yarmulke. And our president, Claudia Schrader, who is now a president of York, said nothing about it and did nothing about it, and didn't even initiate any type of action against the student, any type of penalty or proceeding against the student, and didn't even address it in any way at all. And so to see something like that, at really what I considered was the height, although it got a lot worse later, but at that time I thought it was the height of, there was a spate of anti-Semitic incidents in Brooklyn and in New York City in general at that time. And even Brooklyn College spoke out about it. So when my own president would not do it, when it was our own student, that to me was actually very scary, because by doing that, you're implicitly saying, well, it's not that bad. Because our president, Schrader, was very outspoken, and I supported it, in support of the Black community, in support of the Asian American community when they were under attack, and the LGBT community. And I'm huge supporters of all those movements. And every time she spoke out in support of those communities when they were under attack, I supported her fully. And I did so verbally, I did so in emails. So it's actually on the record. And so it's not just about Jews for me. It really isn't. It's about every underrepresented class that has ever been oppressed. And that's very true. And so when this happened at my campus, it was horrifying to me that this is the one group she picked to not speak out about. Every other group she spoke out about, and I was, yeah, you're right. And then when it came to a Jew, she didn't speak out. So that was really scary to me. Obviously, what's going on at City College, I thought was horrible last year with the encampments. I thought that was dangerous to students. I thought it interfered with Jewish rights and all students' rights, not just Jews, to get to their classes and have an education. And a lot of other stuff is going on too, but
Yeah, let me I want to ask a little more about the encampments. I mean, on someone, attacking someone with a baseball bat, I mean, that's obviously, there's, I don't see that's profoundly wrong and a crime. It seems.
he was convicted of a hate crime, by the way.
Right. So in terms of the encampments, what where do you draw the line between the rights of students to protest for what they believe in, right? And why do you think that the encampment at City College wasn't not a form of legitimate protest?
Because students were attacked.
Mm-hmm.
Students were injured. People were grabbed and pushed and shoved and not allowed to get to their classes. I don't oppose protests, God forbid. I'm a huge free speech guy. I'm not sure we're going to disagree on free speech. We might, but I'm not sure about that because I'm an enormous supporter of free speech. But free speech has limitations, as we both know. And so when you are interfering with the right to an education, especially on a university campus, it's funny. A lot of people cite the Supreme Court case law to defend basically the encampments as free speech. But at a public university, we are under a different standard. There's a whole line of Supreme Court cases that talk about the obligation of a public university to basically allow students to get an education. And anything that interferes with that, anything that interferes with the right of a student to get to their class, have an education, right? So it's not, but I was actually physically assaulted, if you want to be technical about it. I wasn't injured or harmed in any way, but there was a similar type of protest on my campus. And I went down there and I waved an American flag, not an Israeli flag, by the way, an American flag. And I was actually grabbed, right? And the flag that I was holding was grabbed and pulled away. I got it back, but that's an assault. I mean, you can't do that. You can't touch people. You can't touch things people are holding. That's illegal. That's an assault. I consider what happened to me minimal compared to others, but it is not legal.
Oh, okay, so I agree. I don't think that people should be assaulted in any way. Would you also think that there have been cases on college campuses where pro-Israel students or protesters assaulted pro-Palestinian protesters?
Are you aware of an incident of that? You can, if you tell me, I'll
Yeah,
I wouldn't deny it if it happened.
I'm thinking, first of all, there was this incident where a number of Columbia students went to the hospital because they were sprayed with some kind of substance by some pro-Israel students. There was the attack on the encampment at UCLA, where some people from the community seemed basically violently attacked the encampment. So it seems to me that there was some protesters. It seems to me putting aside the violence by police, right? There was the former head of the Jewish Studies program at Dartmouth who was thrown to the ground by police. There was a professor at University of Wisconsin in Madison who was injured by police when they were coming to so it seems to me my sense of it, tell me if I'm wrong, is that violence is wrong, period, right? Regardless of your political views. My sense is that there's been if you have incidents of violence by pro-Palestine protesters, there's also been violence by pro-Israel protesters and also by the police.
100. Now, your broad state, you gave a lot of examples there, Peter.
Yeah.
So that's a lot to get into.
Yeah.
Your broad statement, of course, there is no. Let me be very clear about this. There is no place for a Baruch Goldstein in this world. All right. Obviously, that is an extreme situation. If you're
Mhm.
causing violence on either side,
Mhm.
right? I call balls and strikes. All
Mhm.
right. You shouldn't be instigating violence on either side. If
Mhm.
that is true, that CUNY students, I had not heard of this.
Like
But if that,
Colombia, Colombia with this thing that they were sprayed with by I think the claim was, I think it's been alleged that by pro-Israel students who sprayed this very noxious spray into a protest of
well, that's
pro-Palestine.
outrageous. I mean,
Mhm.
I wouldn't support that.
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah,
that's an outrageous thing to do.
yeah, yeah. But so,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I would distinguish though, without having seen the video that you're talking about, because you gave
Mhm.
a few examples.
Yeah,
The police is a little bit different. The police are, by definition, getting involved in physical brawls sometimes, and they have to separate people. So again,
yeah,
police have to act. I just spoke about Derek Chauvin, right?
yeah, yeah,
He's a murderer,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So obviously that's not okay,
yeah,
and police have to act with discretion.
yeah.
But obviously it's a little bit different because they're by definition getting involved in pre-existing fights. So I would have to see the videos, but I don't necessarily disagree with you. We would have to see what happened.
Right. So I guess if we move from questions where there have been claims about violence, to questions where I don't think the issue is physical violence, I'm curious to get your perspective. So there was this case. I think this is now, it's been a couple weeks now, but there was this position that was listed at Hunter College for a Palestine Studies professor. Um, and the job description had a bunch of words in it about this person would be studying colonialism and apartheid and genocide. And then Kathy Hochul, the governor of Florida, said that this might be anti-Semitic, and they took down the job description, as I understand it. Tell me what you thought of that.
So just I think you misspoke. Hochul is the New York governor.
Oh, what did I call her?
In Florida.
Oh, Florida. Really, Florida? It's
Something must have
funny.
happened. Something must have happened recently that you were thinking about in
I
Florida.
think it's the cold weather. I probably wish I were in Florida. Anyway, sorry. I'm sure the Florida governor would do it too, but it was the New York governor, Kathy Hochul. Sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
So yeah, so Hunter, well, listen, the ad in my mind used the most anti-Semitic modern day tropes that exist, which is calling Israel a settler colonial state, which is a lie, calling Israel apartheid, which is a lie, and calling Israel a genocidal state, which again is a lie. To me, these are blood libels. To me, these are no different than the accusations made back in the day by the other side that hates Jews, which is that Jews put the blood of Christians into matzah when they're hey, we're getting ready for Pesach now, a month away. The same kind of blood libels. So we can get into. I haven't yet even started talking about whether the process, because you haven't asked me anything yet about that. But in terms of the substance of what was listed in the ad, it was clear that the chorus would be talking about that in terms of in relation to Israel.
Right. So I guess the 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 process question would be, you're not a scholar of Israel and Palestine. I mean, you feel very strongly about it, but it's not your academic work, right? And certainly Kathy Hochul is not a scholar of this issue. So why are you or she qualified to determine whether the use of the term settler, colonial, or apartheid is illegitimate for someone studying this? Isn't the point that these decisions are supposed to be made by scholars who study these subjects?
Well, I don't think you need to be a scholar to know what is racist or academic. I think nobody is a scholar. Anyone who watched the George Floyd video would agree that Derek Chauvin is a murderer. You don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to be a police officer to know that Derek Chauvin is a murderer. You're not a police officer. You're not a lawyer. And I would ask you the same thing. I would give you the same discretion that I would ask that you give me on that topic,
Mhm.
because you're talking about laws. And I'm talking about laws here, and I'm an expert on the law.
Right.
I'm an expert on discrimination law. So by definition, if I see discrimination, I'm able to understand it in a legal context. I'm able to define it. I'm able to discern what is legally discriminatory. So there are certain parts of this, which again we haven't gotten into yet,
Right.
which are discriminatory. But beyond that, there's also, I am an academic, I am a scholar, I have been published, and I've been teaching for over 20 years. and I've served on a curriculum committee at my college for 16 years. So besides for the legal side to this, which where I am an expert, which I do think makes me qualified to talk about this, but besides for that, there's also academic discretion of passing curriculum that is actually truthful, teaches truth, not lies. So I would ask for a little bit of leeway on that, because as a lawyer, I do think I have expertise on what is discriminatory, what could lead to discrimination as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the reason I think is that my understanding is that there are a lot of people who study Israel and Palestine, significant number of them Jewish scholars, who use the prism of settler colonialism to understand Zionism in Israel. I mean, partly because the early Zionists used that term themselves. I mean, this was not a dirty word, right? I mean, the Zionists created something called the Jewish Colonization Association. Vladimir Jabotinsky, in his famous essay, The Iron Wall, he compares people like him, the Zionists, to the pilgrims who came to North America. Theodore Herzl wrote to Cecil Rhodes, who were in Southern Africa, and said, we are involved in a common project here. I mean, there are many, many, many examples of early Zionists using the term colonists to describe themselves. So why are you so sure that this is a baseless and anti-Semitic term?
I think it's ludicrous to talk about a movement from 120 years ago and compare it to Zionism today. I actually find that quite offensive, because my views don't align with Theodore Herzl even remotely. And I would argue that probably over 99% of Jews today don't view Zionism in the lens of Theodore Herzl. They don't think of it politically. They're talking about land. They're not talking about politics. My Zionism has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with the land. In fact, I would actually concede to you in this Zoom that we're doing that if the Palestinians controlled the land of Israel, my Zionism would not be changed even remotely, because my Zionism is connected to land itself, not who's in charge of the land, not whether it's Bibi or Ehud Barak, right? It's connected to land itself. The land itself is holy. So, I don't think, but in terms of, if you want to get into a discussion, let me just clarify from your side. So do you view those three things that were in the ad? So settler, colonial, genocidal, apartheid. Do you view those three things as true statements about the state of Israel?
Well, I think that let's take them one by one. I think there's no question that I believe that Israel and Zionism has settler colonial features. It was a movement of led by Jews who were in Europe, who had views about the Middle East that were not so different than the non-Jews around them, who at that time were creating colonies in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East. They saw this as a backward part of the world, that they were going to bring modernity and progress to this part of the world. That's the way that people like Herzl spoke. But they also became involved in a process that led to the dispossession of the Arab people who were there in 1948 through mass expulsion, right? And then military control since 1967. The Palestinian citizens were under military law from 1948 to 1966. So yeah, that's not to deny that Zionism was other things too. It was a movement of refuge, experienced as a refuge for Jews who were fleeing anti-Semitism. It was experienced as a liberation. Obviously, you and I both know that Jewish texts are suffused with what you talk about, the holiness of the land, which is exactly right. The holiness of the land is not dependent on who controls it, as you said.
That's right.
The holiness of the land exists whether it's under the Romans or the Ottomans or under anybody, right? But so, yeah, I think Zionism does have settler colonial features, just like America is a settler colony, which had settler colonial features. And so I don't think of that as anti-Semitic.
All right. So we'll do each of them one
Okay.
by one. So
Yeah.
I think it's, you know, to call an indigenous people, I mean, Jews are clearly indigenous to the land of Israel.
Yeah.
It is not possible in my mind for people who are indigenous. Jews have had a constant presence in Israel. You've heard this a million times.
Yeah, no, no. And I agree. Jews have had a constant presence.
For 3,000 years, Jews, I'm sorry?
No, no, I agree with you. The Jews have had a constant presence.
I don't know how, and you also conceded that so many Jews over the course of history from so many different countries, I mean, it's happened every generation practically, even to today, from France, from Europe, Jews are fleeing for religious reasons because of their being oppressed from different countries. That is
Yes.
not settler colonialism. That's fleeing to an existing presence of, there's been a constant presence for 3,000 years. And Jews, what countries, in order to be settler colonial, and I would fully agree with you that countries like
Mhm.
England have been settler colonial. Look at New Zealand. New Zealand is colonized.
Absolutely.
What country's flag are Jews planting on Israel when they go there?
Well, I think you can have a group of people that are fleeing persecution, right? I mean, the Pilgrims were also fleeing persecution. The Huguenots, the Afrikaners were French Protestants who were fleeing Catholic persecution after the religious wars in Europe. So first of all, just because you're fleeing persecution in one place doesn't mean you can't be involved in a settler colonial place project in another place. And on the question of indigeneity, I think Liberia was a settler colony, right?
Well, what
Liberia
does
was
colonizing mean then? Then
because
I don't understand what.
colonizing means that you come from a different place, right? In Liberia, you have these Africans who were taken as slaves. They come to the United States. Then they decide they're going to go back to West Africa, to the places they're from, not after 2,000 years, but really after a much shorter period of time. But they have taken on a set of ideas that believe that they are now are kind of a more modern civilization than those people who still remain in Africa. They go back and they basically dominate them. They take political control, they deny them basic rights, and they oppress the native Liberians, the so-called Americo-Liberians, oppress the native Liberians for a really long time. So I don't think that the fact that Jews have like a deep, ancient spiritual connection to the place means that Zionism can't also have settler colonial features, just as Liberia did.
I mean, I obviously completely disagree with all that. I don't think you can be a settler colonizer without actually colonizing for a larger nation. To me, that is the definition.
You mean
So
because
we're going to
you're saying there's no
disagree.
metropole, like there's no like, but Britain, I think Britain served as the metropole. I mean, it couldn't have
Yeah.
happened without the Balfour Declaration and the British Mandate.
Well, Britain colonized Palestine.
Right, but Britain was also it was Britain that said that we support this being a Jewish home, right? So
That's
Britain
true.
was really critical. Without Britain, this process probably wouldn't have been able to take shape in the way it did.
But I don't know of any Jews who planted the flag of Britain on the land of Palestine.
No, no, no. I mean, it was a Jewish national project that could exist because it had
But
British
see,
support.
that's where you, okay, so now you've isolated the point, not to interrupt,
Yeah,
but I
sure.
want to really get to the meat here.
Yeah.
Now you've isolated the point that I just find hard to imagine that people are still saying in 2025. That's the Theodore Herzl version of Zionism, which I don't think even exists today.
Which is what?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, what's the Theodore Herzl version that I'm?
It's exactly what you said. It's a
Yeah,
completely political version of Zionism that doesn't really exist today. I actually don't know anybody
right.
who views themselves. I'm sure it's possible
Yeah,
that there are political Zionists. There are people out there who believe that everything Netanyahu does is right, everything the Israeli government does is right, but that would be so rare. Anyway, that's a different conversation.
yeah,
I disagree with you about the definition of settler colonizer. I don't think, I mean, I think Jews historically for thousands of years have been fleeing persecution, not to plant the flag, which I think is necessary. You disagree with this, so
yeah.
we're going to have to disagree. But I think you must be planting a flag in order to colonize. You're planting a flag of a larger nation that is trying to be imperial in nature. There's no imperial. In fact, Israel keeps giving back land. After 67, how much land did they give back? Almost all of it.
Well, I no, I mean, I think Israel is colonial in the sense that colonialism
Well,
means that
settler colonial is different than
yes,
colonial.
I think it's both settler and colonial. I mean, I think it's colonial
But
today.
the ad said settler
Yeah,
colonial.
I think it's that. Just look at what's happening. Look at what's happening in the West Bank today, right? Since 1967, when Israel took the West Bank from Jordan, right? Israeli Jews have been moving into the West Bank, right, with the support and protection of the Israeli government, right? And they have been taking land from people who lived there before. And we even to like literally, I don't know, have you followed how closely you followed, but like literally almost every day or every week, I'm seeing examples of Palestinians being expelled from their land in the West Bank. This film, There No Other Land, which won the Oscar. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's really all about the effort to expel the people who live in this little village called Masafrayata, where I've actually been, in order so that settlers can take their land. Like Davka, like that is settler colonialism.
Well, it's dispute. Listen, you could an occupation after a legitimate war. You're talking about again. I disagree with everything you just said. An occupation after that's going to happen a lot today.
That's going to happen a lot. Go ahead.
An occupation after a legitimate war. Israel fought a defensive war in 1967. So you're talking about land that was captured by Israel defending themselves in 67. So whether you agree, I'm not going to get into whether I agree whether it's occupied or disputed, but there are clearly areas that are disputed land versus occupied land. Whether you agree that's true as a broader concept, but occupation is legitimate when there is a belligerent force that still exists in that land. So to say they're taking land from Palestinians when they're occupying the land, you're allowed to have settlers. And it doesn't mean I politically necessarily agree that the constant, settler, increases that happen at certain points of the Netanyahu administration were not helpful to peace. It does, that's a very complicated discussion, which I don't think we want to get into today. But I don't think you can. To call that settler colonial to me makes no sense at all. It is occupied land. It is legitimately, to me, the point I want to make is I view that, and I think it's true, that it is legitimately occupied land because there is constant missiles and attacks coming from that land, resulting from a war that was defensive, where that land was taken by Israel. So it's not. So to me, no, I don't see that as settler colonial.
Can I have you like spent time in the West Bank with Palestinians?
Well, I've spent time very close, but no.
Okay. I just think
I was in Israel recently for my son's bar mitzvah. We were very close, but not there. No.
yeah, I would just say if you're lucky enough to have another simcha there like that, I would really encourage you to go because what I've seen when I've gone there, and I've gone many, many times now, is I see people whose lands have been taken, and like individual people, right? Like who can say like this was our land. We were not, regardless of what happened in the Jordanians in 1967, like these are the people who've been living in a place for a long time. And the Israeli government basically comes and says, this land is no longer yours. It's now state land, right? And they have a bunch of different ways they do that. And then the land ends up in a settlement, which is growing and growing nearby them. And so to me, that when I think about settler colonialism, that's part of what I think about is a process of continuing dispossession of people in which their land is taken.
Occupied land does not settle. Again, when you fight a defensive war, you haven't even addressed the 67 war, Peter.
Okay, but oh, sorry, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
That land results from what? From the fact that they attempted to wipe Israel out in 67. But I want to actually agree with you on one point there.
Yeah.
Okay, because I want to actually try to find some basis of agreement here too.
Okay.
My goal is not just to fight with you.
Okay.
So let me just say one thing where I firmly agree with you. Is there any question at all? Because there are people on the far right that will say the Palestinians are not victims. That is insane.
Right.
Palestinian civilians are horrific victims. Right. I want to validate what you just said. Right. There is no question about it. But the bigger question is, can we be honest about who to blame for that? Because Israel withdrew completely, right, from Gaza. There is no occupation. Not true?
No, I disagree with that. I don't think Israel withdrew completely from Gaza. I think it changed the nature of its occupation.
A decade ago.
What year was that? In 2005.
2005, 20 years ago.
Yes.
So you don't agree they withdrew from Gaza?
The soldiers and the settlers withdrew, but Israel maintained control of Gaza.
Okay, you said something very important. The soldiers, the military presence, and the settlers withdrew. But let's stick to the settlers for a minute.
Right. The settlers did. But it's also important.
And what happened? Was that a disaster?
No. But first of all, I think we need to talk about what happened. Right. Israel withdrew, but it maintained maintained control of the airspace and the coastline, and it maintained control of the land borders. One of the land border, it shares control with Egypt. The other land borders, it has total control. It maintains control of the population registry. So any person or good cannot come in and out of Gaza without Israel's permission. Israel even maintained a military buffer inside the Gaza Strip from which Palestinians were barred from going at risk of being shot. Right. So to me, it was like you have a prison and the prison guards leave the prison, but they erect a perimeter around the prison controlling everything that goes in and out. It's still a prison.
Well, the Palestinian people elected Hamas to govern them, and again, to not mention that
That was
Israel,
afterward. Yeah.
yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
That's my point. That after that they left, after that they abandoned Gaza, and I would say it was a horrible decision by Israel because it led to October 7th, the greatest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Would that have happened had Israel maintained an occupied presence in Gaza? Of course not.
Well, I
I mean,
mean,
you're saying they didn't have planes flying overhead. They didn't guard tunnels very well, right? Because they weren't there.
yeah, I mean, we don't know what would happen. The settlers in Gaza could have potentially been at risk. I mean,
And by the way, Peter, also I
yeah,
want to point out
yeah,
that the settlers that were taken away, they were
yeah.
completely uprooted. So you're talking about Jewish people who also had homes
Right.
that were
And
completely uprooted and had
yes,
to be
but the
moved in a vicious way.
right. And I believe that Jews have the right to live in Gaza or the West Bank or anywhere else, but they have to live equally alongside the Palestinian neighbors. The problem with the Jewish settlements in Gaza or the West Bank is not that Jews are living there. You and I know, and both know equally well that there are places in the West Bank, not much as much Gaza, but especially the West Bank, that are very sacred to Jews, right? But to me, the theological principle is that all human beings are created in the image of God. And the political expression of that is that all people should be treated equally under the law. I think that's what we both believe in the United
Yes,
States. And to me, what was
absolutely.
wrong with the settlements in Gaza and wrong with the settlements in the West Bank is you have two different legal systems, one for Jews and one for Palestinians. The Jews live under due process. The Palestinians live under legal
Well,
military
that's
law.
just not
And
true.
that was,
I can't let you say that without
wait,
coming
it's
up
not
against it.
true?
It's not a Palestinian Jewish thing. It's a citizen non-citizen
Yeah,
thing,
but
like
yeah,
any
but
country
yeah,
has.
except that the Jews all get to be citizens, and none of the
There are
West
2
Bank
million
Palestinians can be
Arabs
citizens.
living in it. Peter, you know how many
Yes,
Arabs I spoke to and had great conversations with in Israel?
but we're talking about the West Bank here. That where I'm
We're
not.
talking
Yes,
about,
I agree
no,
that
you're
Palestinian
talking about the
citizens.
West Bank. I'm talking about the entire
No, but
country.
I know, but I'm saying yes, yes. Palestinian citizens, who you call Arab Israelis, they have citizenship. But
2
all
million.
yes, but the Palestinians who live in the West Bank don't have citizenship and can't get citizenship, while their Jewish neighbors do, even though they all live under the control of the Israeli state.
And
How
why
is
is
that
that?
fair?
Peter, why?
Why is that?
Why
I
is
mean,
that?
I think the it's interesting
Do you
that
think there's a good
system
reason or do you
the
think there's
question
a
of
racist reason for that?
I think the to me the justification for it is not the point.
What is the
The,
justification?
the justification is probably something along the lines of we can't afford to give these people citizenship and the right to vote and the right to due process and free movement because they would be too much of a threat to us, or because they would threaten the demography of our country because then there'd be too many Palestinian citizens. But Jeffrey, but in reality, the practice is a system of profound structural discrimination, no matter how you justify it. Every group of people who discriminates against another group of people has a justification, right? The question is the system, does the
I don't
system
think it's
pass the basic
discriminating to treat
morality that you and I
citizens
believe in?
differently. I don't agree. I don't think it's different to treat citizens differently than non-citizens. Every single country in the by the way, if you did that, every country in the world would be called all these terms that we're using. Whatever apartheid and whatever. We haven't even. By the way, we're
No.
getting way off. Not that I
Okay.
don't want to continue
Yeah.
this, but
Yeah.
we're getting way off topic. Let's just agree that we
Yeah.
disagree on what settler colonialism is.
Okay. But because I do
Okay.
think yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So
Sorry.
my position is we're talking about the curriculum, right?
We're talking about
You
the
haven't forgotten,
The
Peter.
Hunter
Peter.
College position.
So maybe I'm a little better at this than you thought I was. Okay, but or maybe not. Maybe you think I'm making a horrible argument from my side. Either way, we disagree, right? Either way, we disagree.
Right,
So
right,
let's agree to disagree because we're not going to get anywhere on this.
right. But go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I don't. I hate it when I interrupt people. Go ahead.
No, I hate it too, and we're interrupting both of each other.
That's probably because we're Jews. Okay,
Yeah,
but we did get to this because of the Hunter College position point, right?
right.
We're not completely so we were going through the terms and we kind of got to the apartheid point. Actually, we backed into it anyway because
A little bit of it, but
I would say that the system in the West, like B'Tselem has, like Yesh Din, two Israeli human rights organizations have. I would say that the system in the West Bank, certainly in the West Bank, constitutes apartheid because you got two groups of people living in the same territory under a different legal system. Now, you're saying the Palestinian citizens have citizenship. That's fine. But the Palestinians in the West Bank don't and can't get it,
well, my
even though
point
the
is they
Jews
don't
have it.
discriminate based on race, based on ethnicity, based on national origin, based on religion, based on anything like that. That's my point. I mean, we're going back into the same discussion, but that's my point, and that's true. So to me, it's a lie to call Israel. What are we on now? We're moving on
Apartheid.
now
We're on
to
apartheid.
apartheid. Okay, so we're on apartheid.
Yeah.
So we agree to disagree on settler colonial.
Yes.
But
Yes.
my point is, so I'm defending the Hunter College situation. By the
Yes.
way, just to be clear, Governor Hochul didn't get rid of the course. She got rid of the ad of a person to hire for that particular ad.
But aren't they going to hire? Weren't they going to hire a professor? Weren't they going to hire someone like for?
They were going to hire a professor, and she basically got the ad for the professor taken down. The course still exists.
Oh, but are they going to hire someone to do this Palestine studies job?
I just saw an article that came out today by the College Fix
Yeah.
that says that they have every intention of moving forward with the course. They're going to rewrite the ad.
Okay, but why?
My overall point, though, let me just make my overall point because I'm scared it won't get in here.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Is that me personally, I believe all three of these are lies, are anti-Semitic tropes, and blood libels. And it sounds like you disagree with at least two, and we'll see about the third one.
Right.
You think they're true. So my point, which I really haven't gotten to yet, because this is why you called me on. I don't mind talking about anything, honestly, but this is why I was asked to speak. My point is that all three of them are anti-Semitic tropes that are not true and don't belong in academia. It doesn't mean that it's not a free speech thing to me. It's not. If somebody wanted if I'm on a curriculum committee, right? So if one of the departments came into our group, our meeting, and said, I want to teach a course on why the world actually is flat, okay? My obligation on the curriculum committee is to vote against a ridiculous course like that. We know the world is flat. And the reason why I use that example is because it's not controversial. I mean, it's controversial against some people who actually believe the world is flat. But most human beings know that science has proven the world is not flat. So I would vote against a course like that because it's not true. So here, to me, I believe these are three things that are factually proven to be false and also encourage anti-Semitism, right? Are also offensive, but it's not true. And that's part of the anti-Semitism of it from my perspective. So just to explain to you my view on the curriculum side to this, I feel it is, and by the way, every course, as you well known, has to go through multiple levels to get through and pass. So it goes through the college, it goes through CUNY, it goes through the Board of Trustees. The trustees voted on this course. To me, Bill Thompson is a huge hypocrite, the biggest hypocrite in the world.
You should tell people who he is. They might not know who he is.
Bill Thompson is the chair of the Board of Trustees of CUNY. So in one breath, he went and he voted to support this course with these three terms. And then he agreed with Governor Hochul that the language was divisive. I forgot the exact terminology, divisive and offensive, and not helpful. And he actually agreed with the governor. No, he didn't. He didn't agree with the governor. He voted to approve the course. So that is either he's completely incompetent and doesn't understand what the course said, or he didn't read it, which is equally, to me, derelict of his job, or he's a hypocrite because he then goes and agrees with the governor. But anyway, this went through CUNY. So I have two problems here. I really only have one problem because I think that the course itself is the issue, not really the ad. The governor only has so much power. She can't go in. We have academic freedom. We have colleges that do their own curriculum. And so she shouldn't be going in really routinely and taking courses out of curriculum. But that's not what she did here. She took away just the ad. The course exists. The course is going to run. My fear is, I know it's not your fear. My fear is the course is going to run and it's going to teach these three anti-Semitic blood libel tropes and even cause more hatred than there already is on college campuses. To your credit, Peter, I've seen you talk over the years, and I've seen you evolve in different ways over the years. Some for the good, mostly for what I
Be careful about saying something nice about me, Jeffrey. You're already on thin ice with, doing this conversation at all.
Well, there is something I like very much. There's a lot I don't like about your views, but there is something I like very much about you, which is that you're open to hearing things and adapting your view on it somewhat. So do I think I'm going to convince you of anything? No. Are you more knowledgeable on the history of the Middle East than me? Absolutely. Am I more knowledgeable on the law? Yes.
That's
true. So I think that's fair. Yes. And But I've seen you evolve on this issue, and some of the things you said today, because I haven't kept fully up to date with all
Yeah,
the things you
yeah,
said,
yeah.
differ from things you said 10 years ago on the issue of apartheid, on the issue, at least what I've heard in your speeches.
Yeah, my
It's a
views
little
have evolved.
surprising to
True.
me because I find
Yeah,
these to be such toxic, dangerous terms. And I
yeah,
think there was a time that you agreed with that. I
uh,
watched your debate to prepare for
yeah,
today, Peter.
yeah.
You know what I did? I watched your debate with Alan Dershowitz.
Okay.
And I found that to be a terrific debate. And
Yeah,
I think everybody should watch it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought you did a great job. I found myself agreeing with you
Mhm.
more often than I thought I would
Yeah,
on
yeah,
some of the concepts,
yeah.
but that was also 10 years ago, and you've changed a lot in 10 years.
It's true. I am further off the derech, as we might say, off the path. I mean, in my views, but on the, I don't want to. I don't. But on this, I mean, but one of the things that had an impact on my view, for instance, on this question of apartheid, Jeffrey, is that in the interim 10 years, we've had B'Tselem and Yesh Din, probably Israel's two most prominent human rights organizations, and Amnesty International and Human Rights
Well, I
Watch.
don't agree with that to begin with, but go ahead.
Well, I
I
mean,
mean, these you're talking about far left organizations that have
but,
political agendas,
yeah,
right?
but okay. Look,
I mean,
every organization
let's
has a
just say
political.
what they are, though.
Oh, well, okay, but the thing about B'Tselem and Yeshdin
But
and
Salem is basically anti-Israel. There are anti-Israel groups
okay,
even within Israel.
but just methodologically, right? What B'Tselem does, what Yeshdin does, what human rights is that they have researchers in the West Bank who are looking at the way the system works for Palestinians every day. They're gathering evidence, right? And all of these human rights organizations, right, have come to the conclusion that this system of two laws, one law for Israeli Jews in the West Bank, one law for Palestinians in the West Bank, constitutes apartheid. And I
Again,
just
I disagree with that
I know,
statement.
but you had, and I don't, again, I would say this with like respect, but you haven't even been there once. So like, why are you? How can you be so sure that not only that they're wrong, because that these human rights groups which do this every day, this research, are wrong, but that they're
Well, it's not true
anti-Semitic.
that I
Maybe
haven't
they've
been
just
there. I lived there
things that
for a
you haven't
year and I
seen.
was there. It's not that's not true actually. I have been there. It's been a long time, but I have been in these areas. I don't want to say how many years ago because I'm going to age myself. But it's not true that I haven't been there. I've been there probably more than the typical person watching today. So that's not true. And I mean, I don't want to go over this. We're running out of time also, and
Okay,
we haven't
okay,
even gotten to the third one yet.
okay.
I think I've already explained
Mhm.
the citizen non-citizen part of
Right,
it. You
right.
disagree with it. You explained
Yeah,
why,
yeah,
and we just simply
yeah,
disagree. I don't
yeah,
think you can say that
yeah.
about America. Is Israel, listen, is Israel an imperfect democracy? Of course.
Mhm.
There's no question about it. I'm not one of these people who says you can't criticize Israel. You can criticize Israel. Does Israel treat certain Palestinians sometimes very harshly, and do they suffer because of it? Absolutely. But I've not heard you once today put any of the blame on Hamas, which is stunning to me when they hide behind civilians, right? To basically either protect themselves or hide weapons. I mean, violating the most egregious war crimes that exist on earth. And you haven't mentioned Hamas one time today. It's Israel, Israel, Israel,
I
Israel.
think this is the first time you mentioned Hamas, but I
No, it's
mean,
not. It's not. I mentioned before that you didn't mention
okay. Well, if
Hamas.
you want to know what I think about Hamas, I think what Hamas did on October 7th were war crimes. I'm glad leaders are being prosecuted in front of the International Criminal Court. A friend of mine was killed in a Hamas bus bombing in the mid 1990s. I think that was also a war crime. I am
I'm sorry to hear that.
profoundly opposed to any targeting of civilians for any
But
reason.
I'm talking about their own
Yeah,
civilians. I'm not
yeah, but
talking
but
about Israel.
under international law, let's say there's some Hamas fighters in an apartment building or in a hospital. Under international law, that doesn't give you the right to blow up the apartment building or the hospital because you know what? There are a lot of apartment buildings in Israel that have high-ranking Israeli generals in it. God forbid someone would be able to say we can blow up the apartment building because there's some Israeli generals there. The Kiryat, as you know, Israeli military headquarters, is in a densely packed urban area in downtown Tel Aviv. You don't have the right to kill the people around the Kiryat because you're going after the fighters there.
Well,
That's a
listen,
violation of international law.
of course it is, and I disagree fundamentally with the premise that Israel goes around bombing hospitals and
But most of the
civilian buildings.
hospitals are destroyed in
They
Gaza.
actually make phone calls, send text messages, drop flyers, and tell people to leave before they attack an area where there might be civilians. And what is the ratio of civilian to Hamas fighter casualty in this war? The best one in the history of modern urban
How do you
warfare.
know that?
So many experts, military experts, have
Which
testified to
they,
that.
who? I
Even
mean,
if you use Peter, even if you use the Gaza Health Ministry, and do you trust the Gaza Health
no, their
Ministry?
numbers have been way too low. I mean, we know.
Oh, okay, okay,
No,
okay,
we look at you see the Lancet study which just came out?
okay.
I mean, that
Well,
because they only have the numbers of people who died in morgues. They weren't able to count the people who never made it to the morgue
okay.
to
I
begin
mean,
with.
I listen. So okay, fine. I mean, listen. I don't know how to even respond to that. But if let's just even I'm willing to use Gaza's numbers.
Go ahead.
I mean, Gaza fundamentally, Gaza as a core strategy, historically has inflated the numbers of civilians who have died. They use that as a strategy.
No, actually,
They said that
their numbers, the health ministry's numbers have been used historically. That even Israel has said historically the numbers have tended to be correct. Israel and the U.S. has used them. The U.S.
Okay.
I mean, they've
So fine.
actually,
So let's say
yeah,
they're correct. Let's say they're correct. I think they're
yeah,
probably not, but whatever. Do I really know?
mhm,
No. So I'm not going to claim to say I really know what the
right,
numbers are.
right,
But let's agree to at least use
mhm,
Hamas's numbers.
yeah.
Even if you use those numbers, there have been quite a number of military experts that have said that what Israel has done has gone above and beyond what any modern civilian urban warfare country has ever done. The ratio of civilian to fighter casualties is close to one basically,
I
which
don't
is
think,
nothing like the Iraq War,
but
nothing like now I'm like blanking, Iraq, ah
you mean like
Afghanistan,
the
sorry.
fight against ISIS?
Afghanistan war,
Mhm.
Iraq war, not even comparable,
But how
right?
do?
And you look at what the United States did in World War II.
Yeah, but
So right? I mean, the comparison when you're fighting a terrorist entity, that also has to be factored in, right? Hamas. Do you agree that Hamas is a terrorist group?
I think Hamas has. I don't like the word terrorism because I feel like it only
You
gets
can't
applied to.
agree. Wait a
No, no,
second. You
wait a second.
can't
No,
agree with that?
no, wait a second. I said I think that Hamas committed war crimes. I think Hamas's history of targeting civilians is immoral and a violation of international law, and oppose it with all of my being. The reason that I don't like the word terrorist is it only gets applied to what Palestinians do. And I've seen so many Palestinians who've experienced terror,
Peter,
right?
I'm not letting you get away with this. There's
No,
no way.
the
They
term
burned
terrorism.
babies in front of their
Yeah, but
families.
I
They
mean, do you know how?
raped women and cut off their
Yeah,
limbs.
I know, Jeffrey. I know, but
You
yes, those
can't
things are
call that
horrible.
terrorism. Wait
I've,
a
I've,
second. You
wait,
can't
wait.
call that
The
terrorism?
reason I don't want, the reason I don't want to, if I'm going to call it terrorism, then I also have to call the killing of huge numbers of Palestinian civilians,
We
right?
can get to that. We
Yeah,
can get to that.
but we
Okay.
have to talk about them together because all of the lives are equally precious.
I asked you
And,
such a
and
simple question, Peter,
yes,
and you can't even
I
answer whether
no,
Hamas
my
is a
answer,
terrorist group.
I don't want to use a term that I think has become racist because it's only applied to
Wow.
Palestinians and Muslims. It's never applied to America. What America does, it's never applied to Israel or our allies. That's why
So
I
do
want
you
to talk
realize
in
that
terms
you're
of
now
war
giving
crimes.
license to
No,
groups like Hamas,
of
to
course
groups like
not.
ISIS?
I
You're
said,
giving group license to
Jeffrey,
them
I
to
license.
continue to
I just,
kidnap
I've
and
made it,
massacre.
Jeffrey, I've made it emphatically clear. I said they should be prosecuted for what they did on October 7th in targeting civilians. I've said this so many times, I'm literally like blue in the
But
face.
it upsets
But
you that people call them
no,
terrorists.
because I don't want to use a term that I feel just like I wouldn't want to call a black person a thug, even if they did something terrible, because I think it has a racially loaded. I wouldn't want to call a Jew a shyster, even if they were a crook, because there's certain terms that only get applied to one group. That's why I like to use more neutral language about war crimes, about immorality, about violations of international law. We're out of time, but I just wanted to say, and then I'll give you the last word. I don't think it's true that the number of I don't know how one would estimate the number of fighters. What we do know from a whole series of academic experts is we know the number of people who killed who were women, children, and the elderly. And those statistics are at roughly 70%, according to the Lancet. 70% of the people killed, women, children, and the elderly. So even if all of the men, adult men, were Hamas fighters, which they're not, you still wouldn't get anywhere near 50% of the people being killed as Hamas fighters. Let me give you let me give you the last word.
So listen, the last couple minutes of our conversation is shocking to me. I am like my jaw is dropping to the ground, and I hope this is one of the things that you rethink as you have many over the years. To not agree that Hamas, to say that it's a racial, has a racial connotation is absolutely absurd. That is emphatically untrue. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's based on what people do, not who they are. Terrorism has nothing to do with your race, your ethnicity, your religion, or nationality, anything like that. It has to do with the things you do, hiding behind civilians, raping women and tearing off their limbs, for goodness sake, while you're doing it, and doing it in front of parents, and then kidnapping all these people and torturing them. And who knows what these poor people went through. To not call those acts terrorist acts upsets me to my core, because you are, in my mind, you said it was my last word.
Yeah, yeah, okay, go ahead, go ahead. You're fair enough, fair enough.
To my mind, you are stamping an approval that groups in the future can go ahead and keep going, doing these kind of things like ISIS, like the Islamic Jihad, whoever else, like what's happening with the Houthis, all that kind of stuff. It's not even just Jews, right? But what's happening all around the world by groups like Hamas, by saying I'm not going to call them terrorists, to me, that is rubber stamping that what they're doing is not as bad as what most people think. And to me, that is such a dangerous thing to say. And I'm going to end just by saying I couldn't possibly disagree with you more on a very deep level, because I think it's so dangerous.
Right. Well, let me just say one more thing, and then I will give you the last word, because I think this is really important. This is really, I know, I wasn't sure, but I think that what you're saying is something that's really, really deeply heartfelt. And I think if anyone is listening to this and is going to be honest in listening to what I've said, I think they will have heard me said again and again and again how much I abhor attacks on Israeli civilians, going back to the 1990s and on October 7th, which were a series of terrible, terrible war crimes that I'm fundamentally and passionately against. I'm revolted by them with all of my being. But what I would urge you to think about, and then I will give you the last word, is to not only be appalled by those terrible acts that Hamas did, but also to look hard. There have been, B'Tselem did a whole report about Israel's sexual violence and abuse of Palestinian detainees at the State Taman detention center. All of these Palestinians who were disappeared showed up at State Taman and then were tortured and abused. So if we care about the equality of all life, we have to be revolted by attacks on Israeli civilians, but we also have to be revolted at the things that Israel does to Palestinian civilians. Go ahead.
So, with all due respect, Peter, and I happen to like you as a person, we've had great conversations off the record on the phone. I am the only one in this conversation that has said that Israel has done things that are wrong. And I am the only one that has called out both sides in this conversation in certain contexts. You have not once. No, you haven't.
How many times have I said that what Hamas did was wrong? Again and again and again and again, I've said it.
In terms of what's happening to the Palestinians, I'm talking about.
Oh,
you are not putting
what they've done
I'm
to
specifically
Israelis.
talking about. I'm not talking about the larger conflict. Sorry if I wasn't clear.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Palestinian civilians as victims, which in the very beginning of this conversation, I said they are, right? And you are unwilling to even consider that part of that reason is Hamas, a terrorist group. And again, if you're going to give me the last word, give me the last word.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Speak. I mean, listen, you said a lot of things that I disagree with.
Right,
and I'm not going to be able to
okay, okay. Let me just say, Hamas does oppress Palestinian civilians. I agree. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go finish up. Sorry.
Well, at least I got something out of you. But again, to me, I'm just going to end with the same thing, because even though I'm repeating myself, I think it's so important to refuse to call them terrorists. To me, is deeply offensive. To me, is dangerous. And again, rubber stamps anti-Semitism and massacres and kidnappings in the future. And I urge you to reconsider that, because I think what you're doing is extremely, extremely scary, and it really validates some of what is going on today in the world. And I would urge you to reconsider that. That's my closing end.
Okay. Okay. So I'll give you the last word. As I said, Jeffrey, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Peter. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you.